Hello, friends and family and strangers on YouTube. I grew up in a fairly smallish rural town, and the community, the Muslim community within that town, was even smaller. So, in total, maybe a few thousand people, and that was the circle that I operated within. And one thing I remember very, very clearly about my childhood days and growing up was the need to fit in and the need to act and speak in a way that gives you membership and acceptance by that small community. And I remember when I spoke to people, you had to verbally illustrate your allegiance or your commitment to the things that that community saw as important and valuable. And I'll give you an example, give you maybe one or two examples. When you interact with people in a small, close-knit community, you need to pay homage to the things that are sacred to that community. So you need to pay homage to the elderly. You need to pay homage to the Muslim community as a whole. So you always need to pay homage to us as a community. So when you speak about us, I'm putting myself back there. When you speak to somebody, you need to always project your community as better or more morally elevated in whatever way that is. But not just that, to give you acceptance and membership of that community, you also need to often make gestures of disapproval of the behavior that that community does not approve of. So, for example, you would have to condemn the drinkers or the drunk people or the rowdy people or the people who live in squalor. So you would kind of disavow them. Even in a polite way, you would comment negatively on them. And it was only when I studied for my doctorate that these things started to make sense to me. You see, what happens is, for me as a member of that community, I was culturally programmed to function within that community and to be socially accepted within that community. And if I did not make those gestures of commitment or disapproval to the values of that community, then I would almost like my membership would come into question. And in fact, that is what happened, because as I grew up, I began to see contradictions between the values and the cultural ideas that I was taught in the mosque and the ideas that I developed at university or at high school, mixing with my other non-Muslim friends. For example, I felt that oppression, apartheid, etc. is a system that is evil and I need to challenge it. And in my Muslim community, the more pious thing to do was to accept the government. They're allowing you to pray and to go to the mosque, and so you should, not be overtly anti-government. That was the dominant view in any case. So when you start disagreeing and when you start making antagonistic gestures and sounds, then you become ostracized. And that's exactly what happened with me. I became an ostracized person in my community. I was sort of like I received a victim of a lot of innuendo, but also of social excommunication at one stage, when all sorts of labels were applied to me and to those close to me. So that is the situation when people are socially or culturally programmed. then they need to make gestures of commitment or adherence to that culture. You know, in Islam, there's in Islamic, in Quranic or Islamic philosophy, there's a concept of Tabarra and Tawala. And these concepts allude more or less to what I'm speaking about now. Tabarra means making gestures of disapproval and distancing yourself from those ideas. And Tawalla means making sounds or gestures or taking actions of approval towards certain ideas or beliefs. But this is not the purpose of this video. What I want to say is that, and when I watch movies, when I watch television, or when I watch series on Netflix, whatever, I cancelled Netflix, by the way, so there's a lot of junk on there now. But when I watch some series, then I observe the Americans, and I notice how, as a nation, now not as a small town of 200 or 2,000 people, but as a nation, they are required to often make these gestures of approval and gestures of disapproval. So, for example, when they see a soldier, they in America, the military and war is highly sanctified. There's a lot of sanctity and good ascribed to being in the military, or the actions and the endeavors of the American military. So they would always make a gesture of approval when they see somebody who comes from the military. They would say thank you for your service when they meet them. And they won't say that to somebody, who cleans the toilets. I think those people actually also deserve thank you for your service, because who wants to clean toilets? And they would do other things, like in terms of the Midwest, or more the South, they would have often references to the Bible or to Jesus, when they're in trouble, like Jesus take the wheel, that type of invoking certain phrases or ideas that signals where their commitment or where their cultural values lie. Okay, so I think, am I leaving that idea with you? And when you study certain of the authors around us, then in my own doctorate, we are dealing here with reflexiveness and how people reflect on the world and then act in accordance with how they see the world. So if they are in a social situation and they require acceptance, they would make certain utterings or gestures of approval or disapproval which make them fit in with that social group. It facilitates their functioning. So think about yourself, how you have to often in a conversation say things that you wouldn't necessarily want to say or have to say, but you have to say because it makes you a decent person. Like if you say to somebody, how are you? No, I'm fine. Okay. How are you? All these small talk, and then maybe other small comments would just be for social acceptance. Now taking it to the next level, the discussion. I want to compare the social conditioning or the cultural conditioning, because that is cultural conditioning we're talking about. That conditioning is like software in a computer. It is like a program, the operating system that you install in the back of your brain or somewhere in your heart, and you function based on that software. Whatever you do and say, you reflect back to that foundation, to that cultural foundation. And that cultural foundation has certain values and norms and taboos and do's and don'ts, and they are embedded there in your conscience. Let me call it your conscience. Right. So we all walk around with a conscience, and that conscience is created by our cultural upbringing. If you're a Muslim, that cultural upbringing is, or Sunni Muslim, even, or an Indian Muslim, or a Christian, an American Christian, or a Nigerian Christian, or you're an atheist, a secular person, agnostic, Hindu, whatever, Buddhist, whatever culture you find yourself in, you are furnished by your mother primarily, but also by the extended circle around you, your family, your uncles, your aunts, and the people you grow up amongst. You are furnished, or you are supplied with that software, with that conscience which you function by. Okay, I think we got that point. Now let me take it to the next level. Question I want to ask you is, can you impose a conscience on a community? Can you manufacture and engineer a conscience or a cultural foundation or backdrop to a community? That's the question. So in other words, if I have enough money and I take a bunch of people, can I manufacture a set of values, things that are important, things that are sacred, things that are taboo, things that are open for bargaining and for negotiation, things that are do's and don'ts? Can I manufacture a integrated set of beliefs if I have enough money, and can I manufacture it for people? Well, the purpose of this video is to tell you absolutely yes. We're living in a time, and for the past 27 years, if you were in South Africa, you would have experienced the cultural revolution. The process of people being slowly detached, gradually detached from their traditional cultural values, and gradually shifted towards attaching sacredness to a new set of values and principles. So there's also a word called an ideology. It is the ideology, the way people dream about, see the world, and their hopes and aspirations. All of those things have been supplanted in the past 27 odd years, since 1994. And there was good impulse. In 1994 in South Africa, we were sick of apartheid. We were sick of being under the yoke of the Afrikaner Protestant culture. And that was the culture that was dominating our schools, our communities, the government. And we were sick of it. And we wanted to get rid of something. But in the process, we never realized that the architects of the new South Africa also wanted to impose a culture. So we became detached from our existing culture, but we didn't realize what are we replacing it with. And so here I am today telling you that the culture that replaced the old religious cultures that dominated us before 1994 was effectively replaced by a secular, ultra-liberal, pro-business, new liberal culture. And what does it entail? What does it entail? I'm not going to go into it in this video in detail, but I want to give you some features of that. One of the powerful features of the new holy culture that we have all adopted and embraced is individualism. So now, working hard and making a success of yourself, and being a successful nuclear family, you, your wife, and your kids, that has become sacred. That has acquired sacred status. So no longer is it sacred to be amongst your uncles and your aunts and your cousins and to be a big village. No, the village is cancelled in favor of the household. But not just that far, even the household now is splintered into me alone. So it is me, my apartment, and what my apartment projects about me. So the culture has moved from the village, the community, to the nuclear family, and then to me. And if you now observe popular culture, then it is completely selfish. It is completely focused on me, you know, and that is one sacred element. The other element that is sacred is materialism. It is, you know, in those days, many years ago, we used to brag about our abilities in sport, or our abilities in intellectually, or our abilities as good, you know, selfless people. Now the thing that stands out is your material prowess. So how much gold and how much possessions and how fancy your shoes and your training shoes and the brand name of the shoes, that the training shoes that you're wearing, or the cap that you're wearing, the brand on the cap, or the car that you're driving. And so materialism, individualism, those are now the new cultural sacred cows. But those have not been acquired by us, by ourselves. It's been carefully engineered for us to become materialistic, because for us to be selfless, if I share my surplus with my neighbor, it's bad for business, for the guy who's selling the surplus, who's selling you know, whatever, bread or rice. If I have to give my surplus bread to somebody else, it prevents him from selling a bread to that person. And so the same with security. If you look after your neighbor's house when your neighbor isn't there, and vice versa, it prevents the security company from making money. And so that spirit of solidarity, of community, of village, it's bad for business. And so actively engineered for the past 27 years from big business, who I've dealt with in previous discussions on YouTube, who dominate the cultural and economic landscape in South Africa, has been central to their engineering, has been to shift people away from a community-oriented approach to an individual approach, from a non-materialistic approach to a materialistic approach. So things like, another thing is perhaps, you know, self-restraint is something that we always learned, is like temper your temper, like restrain your temper. Now what we are told is just, you know, no restraint. If you want it, you want it. Act upon your every whim and fancy and desire, and go for what you want. Anything is possible. These are the new slogans, the new fancy slogans of our time. And so a lot of people, without knowing it, will walk around and will pay homage to these new values, to these values which I call anti-social values. They are values that benefit the individual but not society as a whole. So being selfish, being materialistic, being greedy, being unrestrained in terms of your character and your desires, these are all anti-social values. But these anti-social values create big boom for business. And so business is delighted that you become an individualist, a materialist, a unrestrained human being. And so what I want to say is that in terms of the Quran, in terms of my own religious philosophy, it is the origin of slavery. It is the genesis of slavery, when people abandon cosmic or timeless or divine values and principles for fleeting and profane values and principles. Because when I become a materialistic, selfish, unrestrained human being, then I also become an antisocial creature, and I then oppose, or I become an antithesis to the healthy, sound, happy society. And that is the genesis of social problems, of social conflict, in fact. And then we wonder, why did crime go up, and why did why is South Africa the most unequal society in terms of wealth? The poor have gone much poorer, the rich have become even richer, and conflict and violence and gender-based violence and all sorts of problems are facing us right now. So I want to say to you is that I'm not saying that we need to go back to village culture, we need to assume our traditional culture. That would be what is called nativism, and I'm not a nativist. What we need to do is we need to scientifically, religiously, spiritually, socially, in whatever form we can have the discussion. We need to look at values and beliefs and principles that benefit us and not harm us. Like if you argue that student drunkenness is a virtue which is promoted, or smoking dacha is a virtue as it is promoted popularly in movies and in popular culture, then you must analyze, is that a positive cultural trait? Is it positive or negative drunkenness, student drunkenness, or unfettered or unrestrained sex, teenage sex? You need to analyze, is it something that benefits the children that are the that ensue from such temporary casual sexual unions? What is the lot of those children? And if you make an objective study based on any objective set of principles, it could be human suffering, social welfare, then you must decide to eliminate the negative practices and beliefs that are imposed on us. Unfortunately, we're sitting with a government, with a political party that is unable, that have not decolonized themselves sufficiently to decolonize the country. So unfortunately, we will remain colonized culturally and intellectually as long as the ruling party is unwilling and unable to liberate itself culturally and intellectually. But thank you for watching this video. I hope I've stirred some thoughts in you. And if you like this type of video, I ask you to please join or to subscribe to the channel, and also to click the like button. That also helps. And give me a positive comment if you've got any ideas on how I could improve. Thank you.